Welcome to Dead Folks Tales. I'm Lola Nash. Let's talk about dead people.
You gonna need it when you go dancing under the fire moon.
Welcome to the premiere episode of Dead Folks Tales. I am your host, author Lola Nash. I am the author of the Crescent City series, which includes both Crescent City Moon and Crescent City Sin. And I am thrilled to be launching a brand new podcast with you guys, Dead Folks Tales, where we are talking about all things New Orleans, haunted history, and just the things that make the Deep South such a great place for those wonderful Gothic tales. And speaking of Southern Gothic stories, I have got an amazing author with me here today. I have my dear friend, Mandy Haynes, who has written two fantastic collections of short stories. You have got to go and get these. We have Sharp as the Serpent's Tooth, Eva and Other Stories, one of my all-time favorite books, as well as Walking the Wrong Way Home. And Mandy, I asked you here, and talk to you now. I asked you here for the first episode of the show because you and I have talked before. And you told me one of my favorite stories about this can only happen in New Orleans. And it's just phenomenal. So thank you so much for joining me on the very first episode of Dead Folks Tales. It's truly an honor to have you.
Oh, well, thanks for asking me. I am just so proud to be here.
Well, go ahead.
To talk about Mama Lola.
Yes. Now, for those of you who don't know, Mama Lola was, she's no longer with us anymore, but Mama Lola was one of the voodoo queens of Brooklyn. And now that seems weird being on, we're talking about a Brooklyn voodoo queen being on a show about the Deep South, about New Orleans. But because of her roots in voodoo, she has such a tie to the city of New Orleans, and the city of New Orleans adores Mama Lola as well. And so she's very much revered in that city. And so Mandy has a fantastic story about the time that she met Mama Lola in New Orleans. So Mandy, tell us about how that happened. I mean, what a person to meet accidentally, sort of.
Well, let me tell you, I'm going to tell on myself, I didn't know who Mama Lola was. I went to New Orleans. I love New Orleans, and this was probably my 7th trip there, but it was my first trip over Halloween. I went with my cousin and her husband, and they were telling me about Voodoo Fest, and she said, "Bring your novel and have it blessed." Well, she didn't know, so she knew about the novel that I was working on. But I'd started working on a story that was based in New Orleans, and I thought, I'm going to take this story I hadn't told anybody about with me, because I knew it was going to be something more than just a short story. So try to keep this. So we had a great time. New Orleans had a couple of days before Halloween, and then she and her husband were doing something else. I got fixed up. I had, put on a Halloween costume and went to Domain thinking that this was just going to be really just fun. Right. Not really such a educational, it was so much more than because my cousin, she had been, and she just sort of made it like it was just a lot of fun.
And it is, but there's more to it than that.
And it is, you're right, it is a lot of fun, but I was just blown away. And I had my novel to be blessed in this new novel that I was working on that I hadn't told anybody in my bag, and I'm sitting there. Have you been to Voodoo Fest? And they just put the chairs out on Domain?
I go and hang out on Domain a lot because that's where Voodoo Authentica is. And I love going to Voodoo Authentica. Now, Mama Lola has some ties to Voodoo Authentica, so that
this is all tied in with Voodoo Authentica. So they're the ones that put on Voodoo Fest. Brandy, the owner, and I didn't know any of these people. And I had been in Voodoo Authentica before, just shopping for stuff. But they, that's where all the people that were going to be speaking and stuff, it was there. Well, when you get there, they had, I don't know how many, the Old Domain was closed off. They had folding chairs on the whole street in front of their shop, and food. They were putting out food.
Oh.
And I'm just like, okay, this is this is really cool. This is really cool. So I sat down and I'm watching, and the whole thing, one of the young girls that were helping said, we're going to feed the hungriest first. All this food is for everyone. We're going to feed the hungriest first. So little train jumpers, I don't want to say homeless, but people. And my heart, I was just like, oh, if nothing else happened, that was good enough for me, right? So sitting there and watching that happen, just that, and I'm thinking, this is just beautiful. And then one of the first presenters got up and they were talking, and I see a car pull up, and I see this lady get out, and she gets into a wheelchair, and she has the purple caftan on, and purple and red and little black sunglasses, and she's smoking, and I'm like, who is this person? She's so stinking cute. Well, she gets out and people run up to her and they start saying Mama Lola. So I'm like, oh, she is the voodoo priestess that I should ask to bless my stuff. My cousin said, ask her. Well, I just watched how everybody came up to her, and I'm just sitting over 200 people, in a group of 200 people. She gets situated, and I hear in this deep voice, she's got this deep voice, and she said, you. And I'm like, so I turn around and she points to me and she said, you, pretty girl, come sit beside me. So I'm like,
what an honor.
Right. So I'm like, so I go and I sat beside her and we sit there, and I am not even I'm just in awe of her. I still don't know who she is though. I know that she's a voodoo priestess, but I don't know who Mama Lola is. So I'm sitting there and I asked her, after everybody had gotten the food and then it was time for other people to get up and serve themselves. Well, she was in a wheelchair, so I offered to make her a plate of food. And I remember the look on her face when she looked at me, and she was like, you will get me food? And I said, yeah, what do you want? So she told me what she wanted, and I fed her, and then I gave her drinks. And it's the whole time I'm like, I'm not going to ask her to bless my writing, because people are bringing her gifts. People know who she is. I didn't know who she was. So they're coming up to her and bringing her gifts, and she's blessing them, blessing their pets, blessing everything, And I just am sitting there. I can't believe how lucky I am. Well, as the night goes on, it's getting late. She's getting tired. They started a drum circle. So she was there for a little bit of that, and she left. Well, my cousin and her husband came up. I didn't see them hardly any during the whole thing. They were coming and going. I wasn't leaving. Once I
wouldn't have you out of your operation.
Yeah, right. I'm just what? So she said, did you ask Mama Lola to bless your writing? And I said, no, I didn't have anything to give her, and I wasn't going to ask. And she said, well, this little guy over here, he's a voodoo priest. His name's Jesse. Well, he had on a baseball cap and shorts. I'm like, he's this cute little Cajun. I'm like, I'm not intimidated at all. I'll ask him. So I grabbed my stories and I went over to him, and we dancing and drinking and having just fun. And so I asked him, when I walked up, I'm dancing. He hands me the bottle, take a drink, and he says, what can I do for you? And I said, well, I wanted to, if you would bless my writing. And he's like, sure. And he's that accent. He's so cute. And he takes, I had them in two little folders. He took them and he was rubbing them on his chest. He's all sweaty. And I'm like, this is a great story to tell. This is going to be so much fun. So he does all that. And then he just stops and he stared at me and he said, you have a writer's spirit around you. Well, a really good friend of mine who was a great writer had died recently. And so I was like, I know he's here. I feel him. And he said, yeah, he's here. There are others. You're surrounded. Which goes to some more stories that we talked about. But I was just like, whoa. And I'm looking at this young guy, and then he says, these stories are going to do well. You are a writer. You have a writer's spirit. I'm thinking, this is the end of it, right? I'm like, can't get any better than this. I go back to my room. I'm like, I'd been drinking some gin and stuff. I'm just thinking, this is the best. I can't wait to go to Tennessee and tell this story. Next morning, I get up to go to have some coffee and beignets. And Gene, this little older man, he was friends with Mama Lola and knew my cousin. He had got a reading from my cousin. She had cancer. She had just found out she had cancer. So he got a reading with Mama Lola, which you can't, you cannot get a reading that quick with Mama Lola.
No.
And so he had come and he was in the lobby of the room and he said, I've got bad news, but I've also got good news. And I said, what's the bad news? Mama Lola's feeling poorly and she's not coming into town. So she can't do Glenda's reading at Voodoo Authentica. And I was like, oh no, Glenda's going to be crushed. And he said, but she wants to do a reading at her house in the Ninth Ward. And I was like, no, Glenda's going to love it. I said, I'll go get her and tell her. And Jean said, but she said she won't do the reading. You have to, unless you can come too. And I'm like,
is such a special moment, special invitation. Oh my gosh.
well, and it's like, and how did, like, I didn't know, like, all this is so weird. Come to find out, the driver that picks us up is Jesse, the young priest asked. He's our godson.
That's awesome.
We're in the car and I'm just like, I can't wait to get back to Tennessee. This is like just so cool. If that was all, right? So we're driving and he says, he's from Houma, Louisiana. My cousin asked him where he's from. And he said, Houma. And I'm in the back seat and I said, Houma, that's where one of the main characters in my story is from. Well, and Glenda looked at me like, no, it's not, because it's not the story she knew. And he looked in the mirror and he said, I know. So we get out of the car and I'm like, okay, what? Yeah, you're good. We get out and I said, can't remember now what I said. And he said, I know. I'm telling you, and I know. So we go in the house. Glenda's going to have a reading. I think it might be there an hour. I'm so just can't believe that we're there. And I get to see Mama Lola again. Still don't know exactly everything about her, because I didn't Google her. I was just so in the moment of what happened. Like, I didn't think to look her up, like, or anything. Like, I'm just so dumb.
And I think that makes the story even better, though, because you didn't have that kind of starstruck feeling. You were genuinely there for the woman that she was, not for the woman that, you know, you envisioned her to be. I mean, this was a true, genuine connection between the two of you. And I think, honestly, that element of it makes the story that much better, that you're just so enamored by the woman you didn't even know who she was, or, you know, all of the legends about her. It's just Mama Lola.
And how important. And, well, yeah, so we're sitting there in her house and it's so cute because it's like, then I find out that Jesse and Brandy owns Voodoo Authentica, they're a couple. And that's so they're all family of Mama Lola's. People were coming in and out. Glenda's like looking at me like, I wonder if I'm ever going to have my reading, because we'd been there for about an hour at that point. And I'm like, I don't care. Like just like, don't bring it up. Like,
this is better than your reading. Hush.
Exactly. And people are coming in, and Mama Lola is introducing me as her daughter, and I'm just like, I don't ever want to leave. Like, I just want to follow this lady around. Right? I just want to, she was so sweet. And there are a couple, and Jesse had given me a book. He said, oh, this is a book. It's got some great history on Houma. You might like it, some research for your what you're working on. So I pick it up. People are coming out. Don't be rude. I haven't read it. I put my finger, like, you know, how you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I just closed it. People kept coming. All of a sudden, Mama Lola says, I'm hungry. Sends Jesse out to get in. She says, y'all stay and eat with us. And Glenda's like, oh, golly, I'm never going to get this freedom. And sent him out to get, and y'all, like, it was the fried potatoes at the gas station on the corner, chicken wings and vegetable fried rice from a Chinese restaurant, slaw from like a Popeyes. I mean, I was just like, I love this lady. It was all her comfort food.
Exactly. He knew what Mama Lola wanted to eat. It was like, and it didn't matter how many stops he had to make. It was Mama Lola. She was going to get what she wanted when she said she said.
And she told him, like, she was like, get those potatoes, not at that store. Don't you go. No, you drive over to this one, and that's the potatoes I like. And he's like, I know, Mama, I know. So I'm just like, this alone is, you know, like, such a good story. Comes back, and I'm still holding that book. And he was sitting on he couldn't see where I was. Like, you couldn't see what page I was at in this book. I happened to just look to see where my finger was, and it was a man who was a oyster fisherman in Houma, Louisiana. And I said, whoa, That's so neat. That's what the grandfather in the story I'm writing. And he said, I know. That's my grandfather. And he said the name. And I looked and I was like, holy crap. That's exactly where I was. And I looked at him and he said, don't ask again. You're like, how do you know? I just know. So we ate. Glenda's like, finally, I'm going to get my reading. She goes and sits down. Mama Lola looks at me. And she said she was so glad that I came. Pretty much ignored everybody else. That's why I'm just like, whoa, so glad that I came. And then she turned around and said, and her voice, if you watch her on the videos, and she said, I'm tired. I go to bed now. Come give me a hug. Good night. And so I got up and I hugged her and I kissed her cheek. And she went to bed, and Glenda said, what? Well, her daughter Maggie, Mama Lola's daughter Maggie, who is a wonderful, like fantastic reader and voodoo priestess, she gave Glenda the reading. So it all worked out. But that's it. So when I came home, I'm like, I cannot believe this. And I did research on Mama Lola. And when I found out who she was, I'm like, oh my God. And I thought, why do we feel so connected? And it's like, she had her first child when she was 14. I was 15 when my son was born. And I don't know why, but I don't know why I feel like that had something to do with it. Like,
that's what she feels. I'm sure that's exactly what it was. And she felt that connection too. That's one of the things that always, for me, was important in writing my books, was to get the voodoo in the right perspective. And this story about Mama Lola and just how you met, what they were doing, feeding the hungriest here, is the essence of the voodoo practice. And it was very important for me to have my voodoo priestess in my stories as the good guy. She is protecting those she loves to the point where, she's laying down her own life, putting herself in harm's way, reaching out in every way she can think of, because that is what it's all about. It is about protection. It is about healing. It is about service. And that's something, and honoring those who have come before. And that's something that people don't really understand about New Orleans voodoo, especially. And I love this story about Mama Lola because she, your experience with her, encapsulated her practice and her faith in everything that she did with you, from reaching out to you, just kind of going with her instincts, being there for those that she loved, receiving the gifts, receiving the attention, but reciprocating with blessings. That is what it's all about. And it's just such a special experience that you had that I feel like Hollywood, thanks to Hollywood, we have such a skewed view of what voodoo is. They focus on things that are really taken largely out of context and have turned it into something to be frightened of, something that is dark and vindictive, and it's just not. It's just not. And this story of Mama Lola is a modern day example of the voodoo priestess, walking the walk of her own faith. And when we look at New Orleans tradition, when we look at Marie Laveau, of course, the most famous New Orleans voodoo queen that there was, we hear about Marie Laveau, American Horror Story. It was a great fiction, what they did with her story, and, Sophie Larry, all of that, Mad Madam. But Marie Laveau, when it came down to it, was also a lot like Mama Lola. She was very service-oriented. She was a devout Catholic, which most people don't realize about Marie Laveau. And she worked side by side with Père Antoine, who was one of the priests at St. Louis Cathedral during the yellow fever outbreaks, tending the poor and the sick. And that is what this practice is all about. The priest is doing what he can do with his faith. She is doing what she can do with her faith. And together, they are serving their community and giving back as much as they receive from the community, and just blessings and honor. And that's what it's all about. And it's so misunderstood. And one of the reasons I really wanted you to tell the story today is because we're starting this podcast off really kind of laying the foundations of telling the stories about New Orleans tradition and about the Deep South stories for what they are. Yes, in New Orleans, the lines between fact and fiction, between history and folklore are very, very blurred, and we would not have it any other way. But this story is great at really kind of honing in on what the people are like, what the faith is like down there, and just that special magic that New Orleans has that can connect people you never would connect with anywhere else. It's a very special place. And I had a similar experience where I was researching for the Crescent City books. I was actually researching for book 2. And I sat down at a tarot reader's table in Jackson Square. And I wanted just kind of to get a feel for the books and what was going to happen to the books. And the more I talked to her about what I wanted to do with the voodoo in the book and keeping it as authentic as it should be, doing right by the voodoo practice, she turned out to be a voodoo priestess as well. And she said, can you stick around? I have a few more customers. I'd like to buy you a hurricane. And I was like, yes, ma'am, I can stay. And so we ended up sitting in the courtyard at Felix's Bar on Bourbon Street. And she bought me a hurricane. We sat there, we drank our hurricane, she smoked some cigarettes, and we talked about what was going on in this book, how she felt about it, things I needed to know. And it was such a magical moment to and we had the courtyard to ourselves. It was just the 2 of us. It was like we had stepped back in time, just that brick courtyard, just in the dark on that balmy New Orleans night, sitting there having a hurricane with a voodoo priestess. It only happens in that city. It is. It is magic. You just connect to the right people. And it is absolutely, it's so many reasons. It's my favorite place on the planet. I loved a lot of places on this earth, but there's just something about New Orleans. It gets me. You never really leave New Orleans. Your body may go, but your soul sticks around, is what I've always said. Yeah. And I think that's something that some of those folks, especially like Mama Lola, it's that soul is what's most important. And then they find those souls that they connect to. And she clearly connected to yours. And
I needed it. It's like I needed at that point, I needed all of it, not just I just needed that kindness and that welcoming love that she gave me. It's just unbelievable.
It is. It is a very amazing story, one that I am so honored that you shared with us. And I hope that everybody watching and listening will go and do a little research on Mama Lola and really get to know the woman that you got to know in such a personal way, because she was quite a woman, not just, to the locals in New Orleans or the locals in Brooklyn. She was well known, and rightly so, for all the right reasons. And so she's a
hard working woman who would give you the shirt off her back.
Yes, absolutely. And I love, you shared a little short 1-minute YouTube video of the people singing to Mama Lola, kind of her whole, just the song for her. And one of my favorite moments in that video, as people are coming up to share their love with her and receive her blessings, she actually pulls up a scarf and is dabbing at her eyes because she was so moved by that show of love and affection, as opposed to somebody who felt like it was owed to them. And instead, she was humbled by it. And that, to me, sums her up just so neatly in that one little frame there in that video is so Mama Lola. So, guys, if you ever get a chance to go down to Dumaine, go to Voodoo Fest. It's a lot of fun. But also, just go down to Voodoo Authentica and just kind of hang out with the folks there. They're very kind. It's a neat shop. There's a lot of great voodoo places around, but I'm always drawn to Voodoo Authentica. And I think it's Mama Lola's spirit that's there that kind of pulls me every single time. There's a feeling about that place. So go check it out. Go check out Dumaine. And Mandy, let the folks know where they can find you. We've had the website, Three Dogs Write Press, down there on the bottom. But where else can the folks find you if they want to learn more about your short stories? And they're amazing, folks. You want to read these. They're incredible.
Oh, thanks, Nola. Mandy at just mandyhaynes.com.
mandyhaynes.com. And again, her book's Walking the Wrong Way Home. and Sharp as a Serpent's Tooth, Eva and others' stories. This one so near and dear to my heart. I absolutely love this book. I could read those stories over and over and over again. Just such a spectacular storyteller, both in writing and in person. So thank you, Mandy, so much for joining me. It's really been an honor, and I have enjoyed this very first episode of Dead Folks Tales, and I hope that folks will continue to talk about dead people with me as we go to a monthly show here, and join us. And if you missed anything, you can always watch the replay on Facebook or YouTube, and the podcast will be up everywhere that you get podcasts very soon. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Nola Nash, and we will see you next time.
You know the meaning.